Hello everyone. So I mentioned that I was going to do a video on the NHS, and well, here it is. So I think the NHS, or National Health Service, is kind of like the driving factor in this election. I think that's what's at stake in this election, and depending on if you vote Tory or Labour, um, the future of our NHS could go in two very different directions. And I'll explain that in a bit, but first, and I'll explain, the current status of the NHS and get into a little bit of facts and figures. But first of all, how did it all start? Like, where did the NHS come from and what is it? Obviously, National Health Service, it's a free universal healthcare. We go see our GP, we get diagnosed with a terminal illness or a very serious illness and we get treated. You know, that's it. No questions asked, no big bill at the end of it. That's what that's what socialized healthcare is, right? You have a baby, you don't have to worry about, racking up massive healthcare bills just for your delivery, etc. When did this happen? When did it start? Well, it started in 1948, 3 years after we came out of World War II, right? And for those of you who know your history, the UK wasn't in the best shape then. Our economy wasn't in the best shape then, but yet we recognised, the Labour government at the time recognised that, do you know what, one of the, seeing as a government's role is to, by very definition, is to serve the population, serve, its country people, one of the basic things that you can do is provide free healthcare, because that means no matter what middle class, working class, no matter what your background, no matter what your social status, you can go to a hospital and get treated. That's it. It's that simple. They recognise that. And even though they had very little at the time, they recognised that this was the most important investment that they could make for future generations and the generation at the time. So, and this happened under a Labour government, like I said. And I think people talk quite nonchalantly about, yeah, let's get rid of the NHS, come on, it's, you wait ages, blah, 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 and all this stuff. I tend to find that these are people who have maybe not had so much experience in healthcare systems in other countries where they don't have free universal healthcare. For example, America, right? Probably, I think, maybe the only country in the Western world without a socialized healthcare system. And let me tell you, the situation there, it's quite dire. It's pretty bad because people lose their homes. If for example, if they are diagnosed with cancer, healthcare bills rack up so much that they may end up losing their homes. They may end up, they end up in all sorts of awful financial situations simply because of healthcare. And it's ridiculous that, you shouldn't have to become bankrupt, because you have an illness. In that situation, it's the government's role, it's the government's duty to look after you. So it's madness for them, to have a system in that case where that complete opposite happens, where you're actually preyed upon by multiple third-party private insurance companies, who don't really care about your situation. They're mostly concerned with making profit, because that's what healthcare is. It's a business industry. And I always say, the minute you start seeing, the NHS as a business and say, well, it's losing money, blah, 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 you failed as a government, because that's not the point. The point isn't to make money. The point is to save lives and to maintain a healthy population, because a healthy population, is a more productive one. Basic economics, right? There was another story in America, I remember seeing in a documentary, Sicko, of a guy who had accidentally he didn't have insurance, accidentally sawed off two of his fingers, and he had to choose which finger to reattach. And, he had the option of the middle one, which would have cost him $60,000, and his ring finger, which would have cost him $12,000. I mean, any of you watching this, could you afford that? If heaven forbid, an accident like that was to happen, there were other stories in that documentary about a Canadian who had gone over to America for the day, and in Canada they have socialised healthcare, but they went over to America for some time. They sustained injuries out there, and by the time they came back, they had racked up bills of almost $500,000. That's ridiculous. Come on, We don't want a system like that. When people talk about, let's privatize, let's go into health insurance. No. We do not want to have a system like the American system. It doesn't work. Basically, cards on the table, it just doesn't work. It makes life harder, not easier. And, if you have to wait a little bit longer, but it's free, I think it's worth it. I really think it's worth it. On top of that...
So to privatise it, look at you.
So if you want some kind of idea about what having an American healthcare system would be like, if you look at the world rankings back in 2013, saying the overall ranking, the NHS, the UK healthcare system, which is obviously, as you know, the NHS, that's ranked number 1. And let's look at America. Where is America? Oh, look at that, number 11. It's ranked number 11. The what is it? What do they call it? The country where your dreams can come true, or the American dream. Yeah. The American dream. Get cancer and lose your house. That's the American dream, it seems. But yeah. Anyway, moving away from America, let's go into why again the NHS is important for this election, for the general election, and why it matters which way you vote, how that's going to affect the NHS. Because here's the thing, since 2010, since the Conservatives have come into power, there have been quite a number of structural reforms within the NHS, which have meant that it's not working as efficiently and productively as it could and I want to say at this point that this at all is not a reflection on NHS staff. NHS staff have been working brilliantly under awful conditions for a few years now, and they still carry out their service with a smile, with care, with attention. We can't fault the NHS staff. They're doing fantastically. But they're being let down by corporate positions right at the top, in how the NHS is structured, in the infrastructure of the NHS. What we have are corporate decision makers right at the top, gobbling up the top salaries. And many of these people don't have, they're not healthcare professionals, so they don't understand what the hospital needs, what equipment it needs, and where the funding needs to go. And they, excuse my language, but they piss away a lot of money on agency staff rather than investing in long-term positions which need to be filled within the NHS. And agency staff, especially in a sector like healthcare, if you're bringing them in for the day, they don't know where everything is, and they can often slow things down and hinder what is trying to be done, basically. So, that's one way in which our NHS is being undermined under the Conservatives. And if we look at, for example, under Labour, don't get me wrong, you've all probably heard me rant a lot about New Labour and all the evils of Tony Blair and all that stuff. However, under a Labour government, and don't get me wrong, there was some undercutting under a Labour government, however, between 1997 and 2010, under Labour, real term spending on the NHS went up about 65%, and that's taking inflation into account. The 1997, 2010 went up 65%. If we take into, and then we look since 2010, and, you know, we take into account inflation and valuation and all that stuff, the Tories have spent about their spending on the NHS has gone up about 3.5%. Okay, and you know, if you don't take account into inflation and valuation, which the Conservatives do in whenever they answer questions about the NHS, it seems, they don't take that into account, and so they make out that it's a lot more. But actually, when we take inflation, because I'm sure those of you who are aware that since Brexit, if you've been on holiday, you would have definitely noticed that the pound has decreased in value dramatically. And so that has had an impact on, you know, what it actually means fiscally that you are spending on the NHS, right? And so we're talking about money here, but what does this mean in real terms, in terms of what is actually happening to the NHS and, you know, how it's affecting day-to-day care? Well, I already mentioned, you know, the structural reforms in agencies. But what it boils down to really is our government is selling off huge chunks of our NHS to private firms like dun, 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 Richard Branson's very own Virgin Care. Okay, Virgin Care, which is a private healthcare system. And by the way, now because precious Virgin Care, who are already, you know, running trains and, you know, making airplanes, it's of course natural that now they'll go into healthcare. Of course, you know, that's the natural thing you do. Anyway, now because they didn't get a contract by the NHS, they're now suing the NHS. So let's stay tuned to see, because it's probably going to end up in a settlement, which is going to cost us as taxpayers probably, and going towards more, you know, strangling of the NHS fiscally, basically monetarily. So that sucks. And this will affect your healthcare. This will pave the way for us to develop into privatised healthcare, which will become the norm. Health insurance, which will become the norm. That is what will happen. Basically, if you vote Conservative in 2017 in this general election and the Conservatives get in, goodbye to the NHS. Goodbye. It's gone. It's out of our hands. That's what this means. This is why I'm making this video, to show just how important it is. You know, I've said it before and I'll say it again, but page 5 of Economics for Dummies, a healthy, well-educated nation is a productive nation. It's that simple. You know, we talk about economy, blah, blah, blah. Theresa May said once, we can only have a properly funded NHS if we have a strong economy. No, we can only have a strong economy if we have a properly funded NHS. It's the opposite way round, Mrs. May, actually. You know, so I think enough with the sound bites. You know, this is what NHS staff on the ground every day, you know, working hard, giving the patients their care that they need despite working in the toughest conditions and being stretched to their limits. We're going to lose all our junior doctors. They're going to want to go abroad. No one wants to work under the conditions that Jeremy Hunt, who was formerly our culture secretary, now again, of course, because it's natural. Someone who was dealing with film and media and all of that and sports and the Olympics, they're the natural selection for then dealing with the NHS and healthcare. Yeah, they got loads of experience. They'll know exactly what teachers and nurses are thinking. That's why this is the first time in over 100 years that midwives have gone on strike. You know?
That's going to have a massive impact.
And the NHS, you know, is the most important part of, you know, our society, our country, but it's by no means the only part of it that's going to be privatised. Like security, G4S, hello, who are called, they're constantly called into question for human rights abuses, for using violence, for using, you know, really bad tactics, and they're being sold contracts by the government for national security. This is what this means. This is what voting Conservative means in 2017. What our future will look like is a very scary place. It looks almost like an American model with militarized police force, with a monetized criminal justice system. Do we really want a criminal justice system that works off of profit rather than actually justice? You know, like a healthcare system that is run off of, you know, how many people did we manage to, I don't know, how many people did we manage to make dependent on this drug or something like that, and get them to start paying however much, making medicine almost impossible to buy. In that documentary, again, that I was talking about, they took 9/11 rescue workers to Cuba, which Cuba, by the way, third world country or developing country, free universal healthcare. And this 9/11 rescue worker who was having to pay $120 for an inhaler that she needed because she had respiratory problems, cost 5 cents in Cuba. 5 cents. You know, I mean, you could, you know, do your research and look into it, and, you know, and from your own experience of, you know, using the NHS, you know, think about it. Think about the fact that you know, after getting a scan or after getting whatever, A, you didn't have to have it approved by an insurance company, you know, and B, you didn't have a fat bill at the end of it. I'll just finish it with, you know, it was a meme, but I'll rework it as a little joke here. But Canadian Breaking Bad. Government pays for health insurance, the end. Let's keep it that way. Yeah? Thanks for watching.